Welcome to the Pro Design Builder podcast, the show where professionals and entrepreneurs tell their stories, strategies, and secrets to building a thriving business and a successful life. I'm Sam, your host, as we dive deep into the world of life experiences and entrepreneurship. Before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors, the Pro Design Builder, which is a coaching and consulting firm for investors who want to build spec homes and multifamily units. It's not just about building a business, it's about building a vision and building a life by design. As you know, foster care is near and dear to my heart. I've had 5 different kids through our home. I've adopted 2. I'm currently fostering 1. The mission in foster care is never over. Feel free to give to the link, which is the Patreon. Some of the initiatives that we care about are things that has helped us as foster parents. You know, sometimes having an additional meal where you don't have to worry about anything. And me being the primary cook, I could tell you that's a great help. So we provide stuff like that. We provide beds for foster and adoptive parents, whether it's cribs or bed for a transition. And also, too, we provide additional date night. That's something that we feel strongly about. Supporting the family unit being strong is probably the most important thing that can happen in situations like this. So if we could provide support in that area, we'd love to do it. So without further ado, we have our guest today, David. David Dye. Today's guest is someone that is reshaping the way we think about leadership and financial independence. David is a wealth strategist, international best-selling author, and the founder of Wisdom Wealth Impact Makers Movement. So just wanted to say thank you for coming on, and feel free to share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's actually pronounced D. D is my last name. It's actually Donald, and so it's Donald D. And but I'm from the Philippines, so basically it can be either or from that perspective. But yeah, just it's been a just incredible journey with the Lord through just the ups and downs of life. But He's really placed me in a direction to really serve and gain territory for His kingdom. So I'm just excited. So I had the privilege and honor at a very young age to be in a lot of situations that were not necessarily things that, a lot of people have the opportunity to have. And a lot of that has to do with like mentorships and people that kind of took me under their wings. And so through that process, I was mentored in the corporate world, both in like Fortune 50 all the way down to middle. Then I've owned and started and also been working with people in startups and mentoring businesses for several decades. But I've been working more where my heart was in my 20s to be really personal finance with everyone, because of the way I grew up in the Philippines and in the United States, where we didn't really have a lot of money. And that journey's been really interesting, because I had enough and more than I deserve. But then I, probably made some bad decisions. Actually, I did make some bad decisions with regards to, the money that I did have. And then I lost it all through my favorite place at that time, which is Las Vegas. And went through that process, put my head in the sand. I was by that point, I was already the youngest manager and just director in a Fortune 50 company. And I had a thriving professional background, but this happened. And just kind of, turned a lot of things around for me. And through that process, as I thought life had ended, I had overdrawn in my bank accounts. I'd actually gone through a ton of items where everyone was calling me the bank. So I just bought a house, almost lost it. At that time, I thought I would lose it, wrote bad checks. And that was because I was in Las Vegas. I'd been there for a couple of years. Every weekend, I'd make money, thousands of dollars every 12 hours, and then lost it all at one time. I was raided in the casinos and all the downtown casinos and a third of the strip casinos. That means when I went there, they paid for pretty much anything I wanted.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so it was pretty good. But then when I lost it all, it pointed me back to, at the time, just basically, goal setting. And then from that process, it got me to visioneering, subconscious programming, and a lot of stuff that really was more personal growth, personal development. But once I kind of straightened out everything, I basically, in my head, and started to move forward, I decided to put a set of goals to retire at 40, and with certain metrics that was behind me, and I made my first million in a year. It was probably about 6 to 8 months, is I think when how I recall it, and that was one of my biggest jumps. And then, of course, got everything back straight, got those, hit those much sooner, and then from that point, I went through another situation that was, when you're planning life out and you just think everything's great, and so, and I, in my early 30s, I had pretty much everything I wanted. I remember telling the Lord at that time, and I was not saved, that, you can take me home and I am good to go. I have done everything I wanted to do. There's nothing else I want. And unfortunately, I think he heard me and he kind of said, okay, let's just see. Right. So he basically took everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2006, that was kind of what I thought was the bottom again this time. And if you got, like when you have millions of dollars, it seems like you're invincible, right?
Correct.
So then it's kind of like, then he took it all away, and I was like, okay, 3 weeks into it, I go, I think I got it back under control. I'm
Mm-hmm.
good to go, God. And so he reminded me that I was not in control, and decided to strip everything away after that, whatever else that I forgot that I still had, including a pregnancy. Took that away in like 12 hours, wiped everything out. And that was when I went through basically process with the church program. And through that, I was accepted Christ as my Savior in April 2007. But the bigger part of that is that kind of took me through a process of my marriage, and then I got divorced in 2020, which truly devastated me at that point, which took me to the last part that I'm now in a right direction with God, which is basically I started walking with Christ at that point. And through that process, he told me, you know, all the whole time that I'm thinking, I've tried the Bible, every version of it. I got multiple versions beside my bed. Couldn't understand anything. And my mentor, one of my mentors basically said, just go back to the Bible. Because the June of 2019, I was pretty much done with life. I had four
Mm,
kids. My clinical psychologist I was seeing, a couple times a week. And then my primary mentor, basically was guiding me through that. And whatever they said, I just pretty much did. I was pretty much non-coherent at that point, and didn't want to wake up. And they reminded me of, you're not going to do for yourself, do for your kids. And so I decided to try to figure out, can I even, come out of this situation? And so I had already been saved, but I wasn't walking with the Lord. And then through that process, my mentor said, just go back to the Bible. Go back to the
mm.
Bible. So I go, I've tried. I don't understand anything, right? So but
Yeah.
somehow the June of 2019, everywhere I went in the Bible, literally I understood.
Spoke to
It
you.
was like God opened my eyes, and then I heard, you know, read the Bible front to back. And so I told my mentor that, and he said, I'm not sure I would do that. Old
Mhm.
Testament's a little bit harsh. You might want to
Yeah.
bounce a little bit, between
Yeah.
them. And I said, no, I think I'm supposed to do that, right? So I did it. It took me 4 years and 4 months. I finished that at the end of September 2023. And it's just been phenomenal since that point. And the Lord's like really leading me. And of course, now he pointed me into the online space the last couple of years. We're now in 27 countries. And I'm helping people in the area of personal finance to get to the first $1 million within the first couple of years, which is what I've done as a wealth strategist for over 3 decades. Is create millionaires, but now it's an online space with God behind it, from a kingdom perspective, and just phenomenal progress in just a couple of years. So that's kind of like my journey.
That's sounds amazing. I'm gonna dive into a couple different areas that I wrote down here. The first one is June 2019. You said that you were done with life. I want to know exactly what was going on with you during that time, and then also the next question is clarity through completing the Bible. How did that change the way that you were kind of viewing life?
Oh man, those are just excellent questions.
Hmm.
So the first one is that I was in a 25-year relationship, and basically, we had our normal marriage stuff. We're going through counseling, went through a lot of different things, and apparently, it just wasn't going to work. I stayed in as long as I could, pretty much till the end, and that means she left, uh, 2018. And then I thought it was a vacation because I was like, this is great. I got my own time back. But uh, it only took
Yeah.
about 3 months. And then from
Oh,
that point, I still had
geez.
my 4 kids, and I am proud of the time. And I was like, oh man, like this
This is
is
real.
like
Hmm.
harder than I thought. And then it
Hmm.
became much harder because then like every meal that I wanted to do and I did took me 12 hours to make.
Oh, okay.
uh,
Wow.
and it was painful, right? So it was really painful because I'm a big picture thinker.
Yeah.
And it was tough, but I had already retired, so it was like I didn't have anything. Like I had the
You have
flexibility,
nothing going in a
right?
sense. Yeah.
And so yeah, so that was kind of that kind of took me in a journey for a couple of years until 2020 in January, where my ex filed and finalized the divorce. But through that process was the challenge, because in my mind we're still married. So
Hmm.
in my
Yep.
mind
Yep.
that
Yep.
was basically like like until God really closes it, like even though we're together, like I'm still in the marriage.
Hmm.
And so my focus got divided between that and then also my kids, and then also my purpose, which I wasn't even looking at that time. I wasn't. It was just really hard, right? So that in June of 2019, that kind of happened. We finalized the divorce in 2020. And then God gave me vision on October 2nd of 2020, which led to now the online movement that we have, which is Wisdom Wealth Impact Makers now. And so, and that's now what my mission is to help people pull out their gifting, align it with their calling and purpose so that they can leave a legacy behind for generations to come. And that's now our movement. But the Bible, what's really interesting is that when God opens your eyes, and I went through that process, and I didn't think it was going to take me 4 years, 4 months. I just really wasn't even thinking at all. It was just like God said,
Hmm.
go front to back. And so I did that. And one of the first things for me is that I always thought it was like reading a book, and I hate reading, right? And I hate writing
It's
as
not.
well. No, it's
It's
not, right? So,
absolutely.
and I hate reading, hate writing, and it's kind of
Yeah.
funny because God always has a plan. As
Yeah.
much as I hate writing, I'm already a bestseller in 2 books,
Okay.
so
Fantastic.
international bestseller. But that
Hmm.
process kind of started me in a journey of like the difference between walking with Christ and just accepting Christ as your Savior. And then it also led me down to a prophetic path, that was already in my history. I didn't know it was prophetic. And so
Hmm.
it was kind of, so now I'm in a prophetic journey on top of that, that now I better understand, and I'm still learning. But it really kind of validated a lot of pieces from the secular world that I learned.
Yep.
And so, but it was almost like that discipline of going through it, but just listening to the Lord, because I was in some chapters for like months. I mean, like I just kind of knew. I knew when I was supposed to move forward and when not, and
Hmm.
he would keep me in certain chapters until I got what I was supposed to get out of it. And it was really very fascinating to me. And then, it was after I read it front to back that I got more clarity in the visions that I was getting and the epiphanies and just a ton of stuff that really cannot come from me. And so it's almost like I needed to go through that in order for me to be able to really have the encounters that I have with him now, and just be able to, better listen in our discussions I have with him in our encounters, and then validated after I completed that are now what he's allowed me to be able to do, which is all the things that I learned in the secular world and what we would call success in the general perspective. Now I can see the validation in the Bible, and so in a lot of the pieces that I used to say, but not from a biblical perspective.
Correct.
You
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, this makes more sense, right? So it's like
Hmm.
that's why that works, and that's why this is this way. So that's been just the walk has been
Hmm.
incredible. from that perspective.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, not a lot, a ton, right? They take these principles, they don't want to say that they're biblical principles, right? And then they use them, and they use them in a different form, but they're all, biblically, based. So, do you feel like the chapters you were in when you were going through it would mirror some of the, seasons that you were in your life, or how did that work for you?
So yeah, I don't know if I would look at it as it would mirror the seasons.
Yeah.
There's two things that I believe it did. Number one is that he the Lord actually like just pointed me to certain things in it. And then I think when he pointed me there was something I was supposed to understand in correlation. And that was the second thing is what I got. Like a good example is that he had me on a journey after I finished, 4 years, 4 months in it. I guess I would look at that as like the study
Yeah.
inside it. And one of the things before that even happened, I used to always say to people, I'm like, how do you guys know these verses? Like, how do like people spit out verses, right? And it's
Yep.
so interesting, Sam, because like now I'm like literally, it's like I'm just like I spit out these verses that just like come to me.
They just
It's
come to
just the
you, right?
craziest
They
thing.
they speak they speak from your heart. That's
Oh yeah,
exactly what's
yeah. But
happening.
yeah, so what happened is that for me, it was then he pointed me to very specific, and this is really more like the Lord pointing me in this direction, right? So I'm not sure if this is everyone's journey, but then he pointed me first to the bigger ones, which are like Noah and David and like Paul and like Moses and like I really was more like, okay, well, this is kind of like normal, right? But no, he actually pointed me there, and then he kind of guided me. It was almost like these people, study these people, which are really like however we perceive it, they're the ones that are the bigger, kind of like carvers of the journey or
Yep.
people's journey.
Hmm.
And then he kind of brought me into like the angels, which is like Michael and Gabriel.
Gabriel. Yep.
And so that became part of like my, like kind of like the spiritual side of like my journey of like where this, and then it went down the road of like kingdom, rather than Christian. So just really just been everything's kind of was originally separated, but the Bible had to do with the bigger characters,
Hmm.
or bigger influencers, and then from
Yep.
there he's kind of then narrated. It's almost like he progressed me through the process. Then I went through that to Solomon,
Hmm.
David, Solomon, and then it was almost like he was pointing me to people, and now, which is more like when you were saying, like correlation or mirror, it was, what he's where I'm at now is that he's has me like really mirroring David.
Hmm.
So that's now where I can see my path and I can see it, from that perspective. So it's almost like he had to get me to see the whole thing, history, the Bible,
Yep.
I know what happened, what he did, Jesus did when he walked the 3 years he was actually ministering. It's kind of got narrower and narrower, and then it's like here are the big people. It's not everyone in the Bible. It's kind of
Hmm.
more like study these people, and then it's like it kind of led to like this is kind of what I need you to see, and then from there, I mean, he really landed me at David. So I'm actually now it's kind of like this is what you need to follow.
Yeah, for makes sense. I remember it was a couple years back. I had went through the book of Revelations. I did a study on it, and then where I ended off after that, after the revelation was, I mean, you know how the story ends. You need to be about your father's business right now,
Yeah,
today. You can't wait. So me being just purpose filled with the mission that God has me on, and the things that He's done for me in my life. I shouldn't even be here, right? So to be able to have breath in my life, and to be able to kind of just speak so openly is truly a gift. And if you have never had a life altering experience, you won't really understand how important each day, each hour, each breath is. And that's the story that I want to relay. So thank you for sharing that. So what is Wisdom Wealth Impact Makers all about?
yeah. So the So we started out with the vision on October 2nd, 2020. And truly I wasn't even online. It was just more like God gave me the vision. And I was already running multiple companies, and of course I was already retired, but in the entrepreneurial world I was already running my multiple companies. And uh, the Lord gave me this vision October 2nd, and I called one of my mentors, and I'm like, I don't really understand this, but I think I just got this, right? And I just said my yes to the Lord, and what I
Yeah.
heard, and I'm like, I don't even know like how this would even happen. I was
Yeah.
like,
Exactly.
so he
Hmm.
basically kind of said, well, you know what? Why don't you just ask? I'm like, well, even if it was, I mean, I got these businesses, I can't do any. There's nothing. I don't even think I got capacity, right? He's like, well, go ask, these couple people that's in my other businesses.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, they're not going to go from like an idea, right? So I basically did, and they said yes. So I was like, wow. So we came up with the name of. I was like, well, here's. It wasn't what the Lord. He showed me the end part, the vision. So this is where the
Yep.
visionary part versus like
Hmm.
um, what now I understand to be prophetic. And I saw the vision, but you don't, with the vision, you don't really see like the, like kind of how to get there until you attach to the vision first, the end in mind. And so that started out with, let's do this. I want to talk about wealth because I've been working on like personal finance with people for 3 decades, creating millionaires. But I was always in the private sector,
Yep.
private clients. And so somehow I think let's start there. So I was like prosperity, right? So prosperity, and then it was like seven stages to seven digits is kind of where we looked at it, because I didn't want to use the word money, figures,
Hmm.
like wealth. I didn't want to use any of that. So we came up with like, okay, prosperity, seven stages, seven digits. That's P727. And this is how funny this
Okay.
is.
All right.
So
All right.
so I'm talking, we're at the house, and I'm just like, I wonder if there's a Bible verse, in this, like, like 7 verse 7, or chapter 7:27, right? So
Hmm.
we kept looking, and everywhere we landed, it was like not good. It was
Yeah.
it to me, it was like, "Oh, that's not from the Lord. That's like, don't do
Yeah.
that."
Exactly. It's telling you a
So
different
yeah, so
story.
we're flipping around, and then all of a
Uh
sudden, one of the guys goes, hey, what about like maybe it's 72:7?
huh. Hmm.
And so we're like, well, there's only one place in the that's like Psalms, right? So and we looked up Psalm 72:7, which was like P727,
Hmm.
and that was it, right? So God confirmed it, right? So it was basically it's God's abundance and prosperity till the moon is no more, right?
Mm.
So I was like, well, apparently this is the path, right?
Yeah.
This is,
Yep.
so he
Yep.
confirmed it, right? So we became P727,
Hmm.
and then that was in 2020, I got 2023. So that kind of came up with like, here's a direction, but not necessarily the movement. But the as I've now gone through that journey, now I kind of better understand the people on the online space with a wider range of different countries and just different things. The principles are the same. So it allowed me to validate the stuff that I was already doing with people, and then with a biblical perspective of like the validation now, right? So it's now
Hmm.
there, it's tried and true. It's also in the Bible, confirmed. And so the Lord gave me last year the clarity in first quarter of what I'm supposed to do towards the vision, which is basically pull out people's giftings, give them clarity and alignment to their purpose, and then so that they can, in his exact words, leave a legacy behind for generations to come. And so that
Amazing.
put me on a journey to kind of understand like what is legacy. In my mind before it was like wealth, riches, like, and then through last year this kind of became clear. It's like it's none of those, because whatever we have to build or get or pay for or get with our hands can be destroyed. And that pretty much is everything that I thought of, right?
Hmm.
Real estate, business, that's not the legacy. So
Yep.
the legacy is your journey,
Hmm.
and so what do you leave behind? And then he started pointing me to a lot of different things, which is you might know this. I don't know. Like I'd never thought about it until I heard it. Right, which is like, think about it. Like all the things where we learn it from, the wisdom comes from the people that are dead.
Correct.
They're in the books. There's like they're kind of like this is what they learned in their
Hmm.
lifetime.
Correct.
And so that just validated the legacy. So as I was going through, how do I get people to the direction of them being able to live Deuteronomy 8:18, which is our movement, where the practical aspect of Deuteronomy 8:18, Deuteronomy 8:18 is God gave each person the ability to get or create wealth or produce wealth, depending on the translation version that you have. And then we're the practical aspect of that, because I learned in the secular world. And
Mm-hmm.
then I found that verse, right? And then so our movement is about every person has that ability, and we're all gifted at birth for a calling that you've been predetermined for.
Yeah, for sure.
So then how do we use the resources which we're supposed to have dominion over? That's in Genesis, man created man for dominion over
Mm-hmm.
the resources, not over people. So
Correct.
then it kind of started to come together for me, and we're really here to make an impact. So that's where impact makers comes from. And then it's not about really just wealth, but it's godly worth, which is where wisdom comes from. And so all of these pieces that I've actually done in the past, and then what I started to do to get people to their, and we got some gigantic, already accomplishments and achievements I've made in just a couple of years, right? So in fact,
Mm-hmm.
very small, about like 700,000 in like 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
There's $1 million, like $10,000 in 3 weeks per month, and
Mm-hmm.
these are like my members now, right?
Yep.
And so I was able to do it before, but different now with God. And like from that part of it, it just allowed me to really make the correlation of the Bible verses. So now when we get to Holy Spirit, and there's just a lot of pieces to this, right? But there's the gifts of the Holy Spirit. There's several of them, but
Yep.
two of them are knowledge and wisdom.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So they're separated for a reason, right? They're not the same thing. And one of the things that the Lord clarified for me last year is that, we as believers, we look at the Bible and we're like, okay, this is Proverbs, the book of wisdom from Solomon. What we're missing the point on is that it's Solomon's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your wisdom. So the way you get your wisdom is through your own experience. So you
Correct.
have to take the knowledge, understand it, get the experience. And what I put in is get the results, because you
Mm-hmm.
can just apply it. It doesn't mean that you understand it enough to get
Correct.
results.
Mm-hmm.
So then once you can fulfill that understanding to doing the work, and then getting results, that would be the experience. That's the bridge to becoming your wisdom. And
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of is that shaped, the what our movement now is about. And so now I'm going to move people through um, wealth achiever, wealth builder, and wealth creator. And
Mm-hmm.
our entire movement is based on this thing that the Lord gave me I think it was 2.5 years ago. So every person should have this ability, right? So let me help you get to your first $1 million in a couple of years. When you get there, then go get rid of it. Give
Mm-hmm.
it away, do whatever you want to sell your stuff, everything, house, credit cards, bank account, close everything down, no
Yep.
stocks, no credit cards, no credit. And then close your eyes, spin the globe, put your finger down wherever it lands, open your eyes, go there with nothing but a shirt on your back tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
and then go from $0 to $1 million in that currency.
Yeah.
And when you
Wow.
can comfortably know you can do that from your experience and wisdom,
Yep.
then and you have that ability, that's what financial independence really is.
Oh, I would I would say so. I would definitely say so. You mentioned something that was important. You said, or I wanted to ask you this question: how important is vision as an entrepreneur?
Oh man, as an entrepreneur, it's big, but I wouldn't say it's everything, because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a difference of how do we define entrepreneur. I think this is where one of the things that and again, let me kind of back up to get to that
Go
question.
for it. Go for it.
The so in our movement, and a lot of the things I'm literally rolling out now this week, I announced it last week, I'm rolling out, is everything I noticed now in the online space. Most people online, they come in because they have a need, like they need to make money. They just lost
Correct.
their job, right? So it's like, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
is like, looks like, let me go pay for this to learn this, to do this. So then there's a smaller percentage, which is like where I come from, which is we've already done it. I just want to learn online. And for me, it
Mm-hmm.
was like the Lord pointed me in this direction because he wanted me to reach more people,
Yep.
right? So it's different, right? So like a lot of things I learned online is very watered down. It's just very much it's just different, right? So what I'm rolling out now is the fact is the assumption I make is that, unless you got a ton of money, you're not getting anyone's mastermind,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Because it's
you got to pay
expensive.
for it, right?
Yeah.
But
Exactly. Hmm.
the masterminds today, the way they're called, is kind of based on like the way everyone's doing it now. And it really, there's a basis of starting point, and that starting point is really, prior to Napoleon Hill. So those concepts, if you follow people up the chain of their mentors, and where they learned it from, it's kind of going back to where it is. So I learned it, and I was in those masterminds that were not the way it is now. So everything's very watered down online. So as we go through that, then we get to the words like entrepreneur. So now it's kind of very similar. Entrepreneur, in my opinion, is very watered down, right? So everyone's an entrepreneur online. But what they really are is that they're trying to make money, and they're creating another job for themselves. They're just two different things. So an entrepreneur is a business owner. But the problem is that most people that I've now met, and many of them now are my clients, and many of them are in our movement. Most people are not building a business. They're under the cover, or they're under the perspective that they're building a business and they're an entrepreneur. But what they're really doing is building another job for themselves. And the worst thing you could do, as my business coach of like 25 years told me in the very beginning, the worst thing you can do as a business owner, and he actually started running a mid-sized company when he was 14 years old. So that's my
Hmm.
business coach.
Oh, wow.
And so he said, the worst thing you could do is to work for yourself.
Hmm.
That's the worst thing you can do, because there's no accountability, right?
Hmm.
And so, but that's where everyone's building towards, under the perspective that I want to have my own time. I want to be able to do this, but they don't understand business. So that's where I think when we talk about entrepreneur, it kind of depends on a person's definition. So under the way I understand it, and the way my history is of, I've had businesses for like 4 decades now. And so it's really more, there has to be a vision somewhere along the line. Whether you have to start with it or not is, it depends. But oops, hold on a second. Sorry about that.
No.
So
All
yeah,
good.
so what happens is that, if you are, as an entrepreneur, there eventually has to be a business in order to scale it, but you
Hmm.
don't need the vision in the beginning. So a lot of people, their actual normal path, and this is me as a strategist, right? So wealth strategist, the normal path is that sometimes there's a need, sometimes there's a forced need, like you kind of lost your job and I just got to make money. Sometimes there's a skill set. Sometimes there's a vision. Sometimes it's God led, like prophetic. I'm supposed to do this. I'm called. So I think a vision eventually has to be there in order for it to scale and leave a legacy, which basically means it survives after you. But most people aren't thinking there, and they don't get there, which is why what happens is everyone starts a business. That's what in Arizona, we're LLC friendly and we're entrepreneur friendly. That
Hmm.
means, I mean, you can look around, like 9 out of 10 people in any street probably has an LLC and a
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
right? But that's very different than like what happens when you die.
Hmm.
God calls you home, right?
Yeah.
And most of them, that's the business. It goes away. Because what I'm noticing online, and this is kind of where I'm trying to help people, is that it's really, you're not building another job. What you need to do is a business, and the first thing is understanding financials, and the second thing is understanding business. And neither one of those, I mean, you got to kind of like be further along before people start actually trying to seek that information. And the biggest mistake I see with people with that area is that they're looking at the income that they need to make, which is a income statement perspective. A business, that's a starting point. A
Hmm.
business is basically more of like, what's the valuation? And
Yeah.
that's a balance sheet issue. And I think that's a gigantic part of it. And I think that comes with, like, what are you trying to do with the end in mind? And most people don't have an end in mind. Like, a business is really more like, when do you sell it, and how do you sell it, and what are the three options, and what year is that? And no one thinks that way, which is why I think people spend a ton of money and ton of direction, and they're chasing something that they're really just making better for them for like another job, which is why it ends
Yeah.
in that perspective.
Mhm.
So I think
It
it's important. I just think if you're going to scale and you're going to have a purpose like we have as Christians, an end in mind, right? So then you're walking towards it. But most people don't have an end in mind. Their business,
yeah.
it's not even a business, it's really just another job
Mhm.
under the
No.
label entrepreneur.
No, for sure. No, that's a great, very descriptive thought about what entrepreneurship looks like for sure, and the perspective of separating, being a business owner and an entrepreneur, and how someone should, look at that particular endeavor. I just wanted to get your perspective. What would you say are the three money mistakes people often make in generating wealth? What are the three mistakes that you're seeing?
Yeah, you want kind of general perspective,
Just general,
specific
general.
asset.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I think the number one biggest thing, which is the first thing we address in our movement. So we do challenges throughout the year. They're kind of our outreach, for to serve people. They're free. Is really just understanding like how to look at like the money decisions. It doesn't matter whether it's business, et cetera. It's just understanding the foundation, right? The first thing I think is people don't really understand financials, like personal finance. And I have corporate finance and I have personal finance background, and they're different. But the first thing is that the people that what we see online, and especially the churches, and then some of you guys that are listening to this might be, like this might be your path. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm going to try to explain that, right? So there's the 80% of the population, there's the 10 in poverty, and there's 10 of the wealthy at the top. So I call that the bell curve, right? So and
Hmm.
there's many statistical, correlations like Pareto's principle, Italian mathematician. So, but there's that always applies. It's a bell curve. So the problem is that it's hard to discern online, and so majority of people are in the 80%. The people that are in poverty probably aren't ever going to see this because they don't even have a computer at that
Hmm.
point, or internet, or high speed. But
Yep.
then there's the 10% at the top, which think completely different than the 80%. So to get to that question, it's really in perspective of first, like the mistakes of what's made in the 80%.
Hmm.
Because the 80% are listening to the 80% everyone around them. That
Correct.
means that most people that are Christian based are at the churches, and they're looking at the things that are church, approved, which are going to be Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, Crown
Correct. Correct.
Ministries. And what they do is they serve the 80%. What the
Hmm.
10% have figured out at the top is that that's the wrong direction,
Hmm.
because the problem is that we know this, right? I'm going to guess you kind of seen this in your area as well. And the people, I've been working with churches since like the early 2000s, right?
Hmm.
So because it always dumbfounded me about like everyone's like my mission and my calling, and I've been called to minister. And I'm like, great, that sounds great, right? So, and then I'm like, so, like, tell me your week. Well, I
Yeah.
work, a 40-hour job, but I have to work a little, so it's usually 50, 60 hours. I go home, and then I got to try to, do my sermons for the weekend, and then I minister on Saturday and Sunday. And
Hmm.
I'm like, and I had to reconcile this in the beginning, because I was like, when I accepted Christ, I'm like, oh, but I thought it was God first, spouse second,
Hmm.
children third,
Yep. Yep.
everything
Yep.
falls along it. But when I look at the number of hours,
Hmm.
it's work
It's
is the majority of the
work
hours,
is
but
the
your
majority of the
home
time spent.
and your
Hmm.
ministry is the least amount of hours. It's
Hmm.
got a little bit backwards, right? So that was kind of really interesting. But so they serve the 80% in the churches, which is why think about all the churches. A lot of them don't even make it. There's a few that actually start to become mega churches,
Yeah.
but the congregation are mostly, living 80% or broke.
Hmm.
And it's the
Yep.
same logic as like ministry. And I heard
Hmm.
this for the first time when I went online with one of my mentors, is that, what's wrong with this picture as Christians, right? We're here and we want to serve, and we go on a mission trip. So we raise the money to go there because we want to preach the Bible. We want to preach that God's kingdom's about prosperity and abundance, right?
Correct.
But
Correct. Correct.
we barely got there because we had to raise enough money,
Hmm.
to get there. And we're probably living, middle or lower middle class, but that's God's abundance and prosperity. So we're showing them it's the blind leading the blind. And
Yep.
really, when you go to Deuteronomy 8:18, we have the ability, and it should be abundant because you have the ability to create it.
Correct.
Not,
Correct. Correct.
so when you start to see it differently, it's different from that perspective. So I think number one is understanding financials, and it's understanding wealth is created on the balance sheet, not in the income statement. But
Hmm.
when you look at everything else, it's about budget, it's about your income, it's about that's all income statement. That's not where anyone focuses on in the top 10%. So and then the top 1%, you're not even looking at that.
Yep.
Because as you're trying to figure out how to get a job for $50,000, $60,000 or $25,000, another person is making $1 million.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
it's completely different, right? So that's number one mistake. Number two mistake, I think, is that everyone thinks that they don't have enough money. They have to wait. They have to save. They have to start. And that's completely wrong, right? Because Deuteronomy 18, again, says that you have the ability. And
Hmm.
another part of the Bible says that you have what you need for the season that you're in. So it
Correct.
really doesn't matter how you look at it. Every person can start now, which is like the next challenge I'm doing in February is about, what is the financial path to wealth creation with what you have today, even if you don't have a job, you don't have any money. Well, you do, but you have a way to invest and get assets, not just theoretically. And how do you do that? So number two mistake is that people don't think that they have anything, so they're going to try to save up, which is what everyone says in the 80%. 6 months emergency fund, 9 months, and that's really a waste of money, from that
Hmm.
standpoint. So then the third thing is understanding the end in mind. The end in mind is really more about multiplication and exponential curve is what I call it. After multiplication, it's your money has to work harder for you than you work for it. So we
Hmm.
never make that transition. It's kind of like, okay, I'm going to spend and then I'm going to, you know, invest a little bit, but you're focused on the wrong thing because we need to get our mindset shift. Dr. Miles Monroe's the first one I heard the saying from. It's like, we got to go from consumption to
Yep.
production.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
that's the third item is that it's that mental state of like the money has to work for you. And I hear a lot of Christian people kind of talk about money's bad and like, it's really the love of money. But the bigger one is that they say, the 80% they've been taught in churches, the 80% is basically they'll be slave to debt, and that's correct. But slave to debt basically means that you are bounded by your decisions because of debt. The
Hmm.
reverse of that is also the problem is that the shift has to be debt is a slave to you.
Correct.
It's the other way around. So it's
Hmm.
like money is a resource that you have dominion over, but most people live off of their decisions based on how much money they have. So money has now control of them.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
that's the bigger issue.
No, I agree. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of um when God created Adam and he put him in in abundance and he gave him dominion over pretty much everything, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't in lack and he gave one choice that he said, all right, I just don't want you to do that one thing, right? And we had a sermon the other day, at our church, saying there was like this over like 300,000 trees. So 300,000, opportunities. And he said, no, this is the one that I said, hey, don't do that. Right. And it just kind of gives you the nature of the abundance that, God really wants you in, because that's the original setup, that he has. So thank you for sharing that. I would say, what is your principles on scaling a business or an operation, or how should one look at that?
Yeah. So I think if we look at it from a perspective of entrepreneur, so
Yeah.
an entrepreneur is basically, from you start something and then you build a business and then we scale. So that's one direction. There's a couple other directions depending, like if you buy a business
Mm-hmm.
versus if you're like in a business, you take it over. So there's a couple of different ways to look at it, but let's take the assumption of an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
right? So it's usually almost everything, when it comes to, at least for sure, career, finance, wealth creation, is more of seasons, and it's like it's moving through the seasons. Our life's about seasons, right? There's a good book on it's called Halftime by Robert Buford. Christian person, first half of your life versus second half of your life, going from success to significance. But our seasons, we also have our 20s. our
Mm-hmm.
30s, and then we have like that middle stage, kind of like the bell curve, right? And then you
Yep,
got
yep,
the
yep.
retirement stage. And so in a business, it's kind of the same thing. I think it's understanding that progress through that process, and we're back to, you don't have to have the vision, like the end. You have to be a visionary, but there has to be a path, through
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think, one of those is, what does that path look like of evolution in the business, and what's starting with the end in mind. And so I'm gonna describe it, and I'm gonna tell you what the practical application is that a lot of people are missing.
Perfect.
So it's first more like, here's the idea, and
Mm-hmm.
then like it's right as soon as you come up with like, this is what I want to do, it's then what's the end in mind. And the first thing that people make a mistake on is the end in mind, because they don't have an end in mind. They just kind of have a picture of like, this is what I want to sell,
Correct.
this is what I think I'm supposed to do, right? That's not an end in mind, that's just a product. So in business, there's like, from the prophet, the show Prophet of
Yes,
Marcus
Marcus Lemonis.
Lemonis.
Yeah, yeah,
So he says there's
amazing.
three P's, right? So
Yes.
product, process, and then people. So the product is what people are usually focused on. The service or the product is what you're selling. But that's not the business, right? So and then the three P's are really more to structure the business. When you're talking about like what you asked, which is principles to grow and scale it, you have to start with like, what's the end in mind? And that end has to be, when are you selling it? What's your exit strategy?
Mm-hmm.
And then how are you getting there? And then how are you going through, and how are you measuring that year over year, pre-planned out? So meaning, this is what has to happen to get there. And typically that's a 5 to 7 year
Mm-hmm.
situation. So people don't think that, they don't start there. So now how that's captured in the business world, in courses and everything else, it's what's called a business plan. So, but the thing is, people are just filling out the forms. They're not really fully understanding it, right? Just like, hey, so what's your timeline? Well, no, a business plan is kind of typically, as an entrepreneur, it's a 5 to 7 year. Like, it's kind of knowing that, right? So it's not like, well, a business plan is in 30 years. Well, yeah, I guess that could be it, right? But it's like a completely different situation. So it's a 5 to 7 year. So that's where the practical way to do it is a business plan. But what's more important in my mind is understanding, why are you even having a business plan, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is that for? So it's basically starting with the end in mind, right? So then from there, it's seeing the path through that, and when are you scaling, and why are you have to scale at that time. It's not just a linear thing. It's not like
Yep, yep, yep.
take the middle of the ground. If it's a 10-year business plan, halfway up here, it's not really like that. It's kind of like, because every season in that journey is different. And this is kind of what I talk about, like personal finance and wealth creation. Like in our movement, minimum is $2 million that everyone will be at.
Mm-hmm.
And I already have multimillionaires in just a couple of years,
Yep.
right? But it's not really a linear path. To get to your
Mm-hmm.
first $1 million, there's actually multiple stages, but each stage is kind of different. But until you've gone through it, you don't really know. And my whole thing with everyone is that when you get to your first million, first of all, no one wants to get rid of it. And I'm like, get
Correct.
rid of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the other part is that they're missing the other part of that, which is, it's really the journey, because your first million, you probably got lucky.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like pure luck. You got to do at least several times. And then more importantly, in multiple asset classes.
Yep.
That's really the journey. And that really is the practical aspect of Deuteronomy 8:18.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's basically starting with the end in mind, having a path, which for most of you, that would be a business plan. It should be. And then having the metrics in that path, and then measuring it year over year. And if you do that, it's not a matter of, how do you scale? It's a matter of, is your purpose to scale or not?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the bigger picture of it. You're basically predetermining that path, or what people say in the secular world is, you create your future. The best way to predict your future is to create it.
Yep, yep, yep. No, I couldn't agree more. And God created us to be creators, right? And
Yeah.
if you don't understand that principle, that's probably where you've probably gone wrong. So
Yeah.
entrepreneur tends to go out on this quest to create the way that God made us is to create. And in the end, if because it's a challenge, if they are successful, it leads to, a level of abundance, right? But if they're operating in the way that God created us to be creators, this is what tends to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
So
And what's hard about that is that as life in general in our walk with Christ is we don't really know because we haven't gone through it. So we don't
mhm,
know what that's supposed to look like. And
correct.
so, but that's where the definition of faith really comes in, right?
Hmm.
But faith has to come in where you have a direction, and the only way you have a direction is you got to have an end in mind. So for as
Correct.
believers, that's the end part for us, right? In Judgment Day, this is and then for an eternity with the Lord in His kingdom,
Hmm.
spiritually, and however we want to look at it. But that's the end part, right? So then it's how do we get there? In my mind, is basically your calling and your purpose that He has already created you for at birth, and
Hmm.
He gave you the gifting, your unique gifting, and your gifting was with the intent to serve for your calling and purpose.
Correct.
So it's the same logic on our walk with Christ, or as believers, is basically the end in mind first. What's the path, right? So what's the path? The path is your calling, your purpose, and then your discovery is your journey. And then you start with what you have in your hand today. What you have is your gifting. It's not what you think it is. It's basically it's what you already have. It's not like something you have to,
Hmm.
and that's kind of what you have in your hand. So it's really the same thing. Almost everything is the same at that point.
Yeah. No, that's great. Great. This is great nuggets, filled with nuggets all over the place. Yeah. So I wanted to say, thank you for that. Similar to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think I told you this on the phone. I've had shiny object syndrome,
Mhm.
right, where you'll be down a certain path, and then you in a way kind of get distracted, but one of the things we have in common is you use real estate as a vehicle to grow wealth. So I just wanted to just share, how are you using real estate to as an engine to in helping others as well, and in growing
Yeah,
their wealth.
so I've made millions in three of the four asset classes when you talk about wealth creation, and that's paper assets, real estate asset class, business asset class, and then commodities. Commodities is the only one I don't really. I have stuff in commodities, but it's really like more like leftover money than anything else. And
Hmm.
the reason why is because of the tiering of advantages. So commodities is really kind of a base thing. If you have extra money, is really what it should be at, but you're not going to get wealthy off of that, right? So you can get lucky over a lifetime and purchase something really, like, in my opinion, probably luck, but it's too long of a process. The paper assets, there's multiple ways that you can do it in the paper assets, and many of the people in the regular traditional path, especially their career and their life, like I was, go get a good grade, go get a good college, go get a good degree, go get a good job, work your way up. That's a traditional path, right?
Yep.
And most people that traditional path basically are more focused on paper assets because that's where everything is led to in the bell curve. We're back in the bell curve.
Hmm.
And so, but that's also the starting point is messed up, right? Because it's not messed up. Let's just say from a kingdom perspective, it's not aligned, right? So it's not
Hmm.
messed up because there's going to have to be at 80%.
Yep.
So the first assumption is where it falls short. The first assumption is that everything is built for you to be an employee. So now we go back to, well, that wouldn't be biblically because biblically you're supposed to have your dominion. You're supposed to be a king or queen. A king and a
Correct.
queen is not that, but the system is built around it. So it's really we have to change from that training of the environment and our culture and education system of like employee, which is consumption based versus production based. So
Hmm.
then from there, so there's some things you can do, and most people will play at the surface on that one, but the bigger ones are like margin and and basically option trading. That's a little bit more. So you get a little bit of that, but you're not really getting the full leverage. So then you got business and real estate. Those are two most biggest advantages because there's additional advantages. The big difference between the two is that unless you got a lot of experience in business, business comes and goes because most people don't have enough of the background. So
Yep.
in real estate's the easiest and the fastest. because you don't need a lot, and you can basically control valued assets. And then from there, you can leverage very quickly with very low risk. And guess what's the difference? Not everyone needs to have a business
Yeah.
because everyone can work for someone, but everyone has to have a roof over their head.
Correct.
So then it's the strategy of real estate. So that gets us to real estate's the fastest path. Then from that, it's about understanding it enough so that you're basically going from like, again, what I call the income statement side to the balance sheet. And that's where you got to kind of understand more of how money works and then how real estate works. So if someone has had real estate or they've been an investor or they've had real estate holding for more than a decade, they haven't made $1 million. There's like just something wrong with that picture, you know. And I've talked to so many people now that that's the case. $1 million, if you're in real estate, is like a couple of years, you know, and that's not $1 million in control. That's not buying $1 million property. That's one house in California. I'm talking about, you know, buying, you know, real estate and then basically after you pay off, if you sell the property and you pay off whatever mortgage you have against it in any aspect, $1 million left over. So
Yep.
that's net worth calculation, right? So I think that part is really, it's understanding how that works, but that's just a starting point. The bigger part of that is how do you multiply it? So I call like each of the assets and real estate being the most healthiest, like gooses that lay the golden egg. And so you have to get as many goose as you can, but as soon as the goose that lays the golden egg, you save up your hard-earned money, and then you buy it. But then you have to get it to produce, right? So once it produces the first golden egg, you can't consume it. You have
Correct.
to get enough of those to buy your next goose. And once you get at least 3 of those, then they're going to produce. You can take one and eat off of it, and then it'll continue to produce, but you got to keep seeding. You know, building a plantation, building a foundation. It's not about like, you know, now I have more to consume. I think that's a big part of real estate. So anyone that's in real estate should be at least $1 million in like a couple of years. That's just normal. And going back to the online space is kind of funny to me because everyone celebrates the 7-figure, you know, is what they call a 7-figure entrepreneur. 7 figures is $1 million, right? And it's just funny to me because those words don't make sense to me. It's like 7-figure entrepreneur. And I told the numbers this is like, if you're an entrepreneur, your starting point's $1 million. Anything below $1 million, you're not even an entrepreneur yet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what everyone's striving for and celebrating. I'm like, that's like your first step. Like, you know, that's an entrepreneur is like over that. So it's like, you know, so it's like everything's so watered down online, you know, from that perspective.
No, that makes perfect sense. And, you know, kind of what you're describing is, it sounds like one of the books that I read recently, which is The Compound Effect, which just talks about continuing to your efforts being compounded over time to to create this greater outcome. They use things like, you know, working out. It's not the first day, it's not the 15th day, it's not the 100th day, but then after you looked at the body of work and you're like, wow, this really this effect has really, you know, taken hold. So if you don't mind just diving into the compound effect that you kind of just described to me.
Yeah. So I think it depends. So compound effect is that's I call these like frames or paths. And so in our movement of frameworks,
Yeah.
so the compound effect it actually works in any kind of application, right? So it's basically, you know, it's basically taking what you have in gambling. We used to call that parlay. So
Yeah.
you parlay, you win, and then you don't take anything. You just keep it riding, right? So
Yeah.
it's what I call mathematically exponential curve. So you want to leverage and then move forward. The key, well, there's several pieces to it, but like the first thing is you got to start with something, and this is one of the things that we do in our movement because a lot of people they don't think they have anything, so they're going to do the traditional path of the 80% they've heard, which is let me go save up to start investing. Like you're in the real estate world, right? Like save up
Yeah.
to start investing.
Correct.
So the assumption is wrong, right? So that's the long path. It's not wrong. It's just the path of the 80%.
Yeah.
So if we look as believers and we believe in Deuteronomy 8:18, then you can get it now. So I am highly specialized in creative financing. So
Yep.
one of the people I literally just met within a couple months, they bought a house in New York and made $700,000 on it, 15-minute transaction.
Mm.
And I showed them how to do that. Now, as soon as I say that to people that are in real estate
Yeah.
as investors, they go, "Oh yeah," so they assumed a loan or they got like a mortgage, kind of like a owner financing. I'm like, no, it's on
Mm-hmm.
free,
Mm-hmm.
and we're turning it over to like 1,000,001, right? With none of their money, by the way, and they have
Yep.
already money. So
Yep.
that the rule I give them is that the first house you do with me, you're not using any of your money.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And I have a long history of doing this with people, but it's
Yep.
the assumption is the starting point, right? So, but it's not that. It's basically the fact that I told them this is part of that compounding when you look at bigger numbers is that your first deal, before they did that, by the way, your first deal will be your worst deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not about what they were already in real estate for like 30 years. So
Yep.
it's not like they don't have any experience in it.
Yep.
They were flipping for the last, I think, 4 to 6. They were also on the title side. They were also a real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
So, but everything I showed them is like completely opposite of all the stuff that they learned for like
Yeah.
decades, right? So, because, and you see the results are different. So, so now they're on this path, which is the compounding and practical aspect. They just made $700,000 with pretty much nothing. We're
Mm-hmm.
making it like a million, 1,000,001. Target's 1,000,001. I'm going to take that and I'm going to make it 2 to 5 to 10
Yep. Yep. Yep.
from like one first property, by the way, right?
First.
So
Yeah.
that's the multiplication part of it from a practical aspect that's actually measurable. So time is the same way,
Mm-hmm.
and so is like money, and it's understanding like you have to. It's not just you have something you got to start now because time is the biggest factor with money. And then it's the second thing is that now how is it working harder for you? So one of our key principles in our movement is the money has to, one, you have to tell it what to do before you get it. Number
Correct.
two is that it has to work harder for you than you work for it.
Correct.
So people are missing that and they don't know how to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
the way the path is what I call the wealth triangle. It's like you earn money and then you pay your expenses. And we all know about assets, right? Everyone kind of like, oh, I gotta get an asset, right? What they're missing is what I call the wealth triangle. The wealth triangle is basically you got to disconnect that. You can't pay for your expenses,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then how do you do it is the question, right? Well, your
Mm-hmm.
assets have to pay for it. So everyone knows that too. The question is how do you do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's more the wealth triangle, right? You have to cut the strings, and then basically all your earnings have to go towards assets, and you can only pay expenses from your assets, which basically means doesn't matter what it is, mutual funds, stocks, business, like that's paying your expenses, but it's always hardest in the beginning because people, no one don't know how to do it, but they also make the assumption they don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I go under the assumption of Deuteronomy 18, right? Which is like, guess what? Well, how do they do $700,000 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. From nothing, from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
I bet people they put 10,000 their checking account after no job broke and couldn't pay their next bill. 20,000, not in real estate, by the way. None
Mm-hmm.
of those are real estate, right? So because it's understanding Deuteronomy 8:18. So so when we're talking about compounding, it's making sure that your time, effort starts to multiply faster, and same thing with your money. And business is the exact same way. Like
Yep.
again, we'll go back to entrepreneur. Most entrepreneurs, they're not really entrepreneurs, but it's kind of the way it's set out online. But an entrepreneur is someone that creates businesses. Most people will have their one. That's a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they started it, which could be definition of entrepreneur. But entrepreneurs, which we used to call like people that did more, it's like serial entrepreneurs. But it's an entrepreneur like you build businesses.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So you exit. That's and you keep them if you want, but you're not involved. So it's basically a bigger path. But it's your time spent in the business. Like how is that multiplied out?
Correct.
How is that business multiplied out?
Mm-hmm.
That's the compounding part. And then when we get to like that book, it kind of just depends on how you want to apply it and which part or aspect, from that perspective.
All right. Amazing. Amazing. You're giving out nothing but absolute gems today. So just wanted to say I appreciate. Is there any other principles that you feel that people would get value from that you may have not shared?
Yeah, I'll tell you one that I say to my members, and as if you follow any, like, I wouldn't say multimillionaires because that's like a starting point. I would say people that are like, extremely wealthy, right? 100 mil to like a billion, and the billionaires for sure. They're all going to tell you the same thing. In fact, the best place is that, I like after, and so I don't even know how I got here, right? So it's kind of just like my own journey and people that have taken me under their wings. But it
Hmm.
was the first time I've heard it openly said,
Yeah.
was in Shark Tank. And Mark Cuban said it like a while back in the beginning. He said to one of the investors that were trying, or one of the people that was trying to sell to get investors from the sharks, and he said, in the beginning, you got to be laser focused. You got to be
Hmm.
laser focused, right? So that means like you got to give up whatever you got to give up to do that. Now, that is absolutely true. So then, in the way I used to say before I even went online, before I even heard that, it's the same thing when you're creating wealth. Because I've been creating millionaires for decades now. I'm over like 3.5 decades, I think now, or about 3.5 decades. So I did it, and then I taught it, and then I've created the outcomes on top of that, with people
Hmm.
for over 3 decades. So the it is about that, and that's why what I try to tell people in our movement is that your $1 million is the first one. That the reason why you can get rid of it is because you got to be laser focused. So the problem is that we tend to get to, like, as entrepreneurs, right? We get next shiny object because we're
Yeah.
just like, oh, this one looks good.
Yeah.
Like, this is, I
Exactly.
got this. I see this.
Exactly. I've been
Like,
there.
I got this vision from the Lord, right? Or I feel
Yeah.
called to do this.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, right? So nothing.
Hmm.
But to get to financial independence, you got to learn the journey. So the first thing is get to your first million.
Yeah.
Like, I have so many people I've run across, and they're like, I made this money. And so I've watched people. I mean, this is like my now experience online just the last couple of years. I
Yeah.
have watched my friends make millions of dollars in the first year, or not millions, let's say first million.
Hmm.
And then from there, try to figure out how to make money the next year. The reason
Hmm.
why is they never really understood the journey.
Yeah.
So and that's because once you make it, what do? You spend it, right? So it's basically get to your first million, and then learn that journey, and anything you're wanting to do it after your first million,
Hmm.
right? Because you have less risk from that perspective. But the people that understand that journey, once they get there, the people that understand it will know that you're not even gonna do that. You're gonna do some of it, like might reward yourself, things like that. But you're gonna go, wow, like that was that hard, right?
Yeah.
So what you're gonna do is you're gonna use it to do what you just asked earlier, which is the compounding. If
Yeah.
I can do that a million, I did it in like 5 years. Like, how do I get not 1 million but 2 million from scratch in like half the time?
Yeah.
Like, how do I, how do I do this now? If like, if I did that even in half the time I was able to do it
Correct.
second time around, how do I get my money to do that without my hands?
Correct.
That's now compounding of time, so.
Hmm.
But I think the last thing I'd want to say is that, for anyone that's aspiring to get to financial independence, you know get to your first $1 million. That's just a starting point, right? And if whatever you're wanting to do, it's called delayed gratification.
Correct.
Then do it after your first million and use it with the excess, and more importantly, use it from what's been generated by your assets after a million to
Hmm.
do the stuff that you want to do.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. We always like to end off, and then I'll let you share your contact information with what is your best lessons learned from life and in business?
Yeah. So in life, it's a journey,
Hmm.
right? We just have to keep falling forward, failing forward.
Yeah.
And what I'm now learning better is that, you know, um, in life lessons, it starts with the end in mind. With, as believers, it's basically, God's purpose for you,
Yeah.
and then from there, it's knowing that you have everything you need today, regardless of what it is,
Yes. Yes.
that
Yes.
you have
Yes.
everything you need. So starting with what you have, and just, moving forward. And from a business standpoint, it's following the same thing, except more narrowed towards like one asset class, which is business. And whether someone does real estate business or something else, or their career, it's kind of the same thing, right? So it started with the end in mind, as if from a life, it's like your acceptance of the Lord. And then it's, what's that path look like? What does it look like in business? Same thing. What's your end? why you're doing the business. Otherwise, just work. Most people
Yeah.
will make more money per hour working for someone else in a big company than it will be for the amount of hours they're going to take to make that same money in their own business. So
Hmm.
if the purpose is the money, then do that, right? Gain the skill set. But it's applying the exact same thing. End in mind in the business first. What's the path? And then what's the path? And then once you kind of understand that, then it's starting with what you have today. And it's just purely execution at that point. And that's the way it is with life. So we know we accept Christ. And every one of us knows this. When you accept Christ, we might have this perspective that, wow, I've accepted him now. The world just changed around me. Right? And
Yeah.
then now I'm broken. I'm rich. Like, so it's like now I don't have a
Yeah.
job. And
Yeah.
wow, lo and behold, I accepted Christ yesterday. I got a job offer, right? So I mean, it
Yeah.
could happen, right?
Hmm.
Because God, answers desires of our hearts and answers our
Yeah.
prayers. But it's not like that, right? It's like we accept it with the end in mind.
Hmm.
Now, how do I get there? Well, you got to surround yourself, right? And what's one of the things? The Bible or church or the community.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, oh, now I'm starting to understand it, but you're still walking towards it.
For sure.
And that's that frame is just basically the same at that point
Yeah.
for business.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, how can people get a hold of you, or if they wanted to join your program, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I would say the link is going to be my name, Donald J D, and that's everything without the spaces, without the period, and it's dy at the end.com. And so that would be my page, and you can see kind of my background, but also like what we do. But then I would encourage everyone to follow me on Facebook. Right, you'll find my name there. I have a colored picture of me, and I'll have my wealth strategist. And then join our free community. We only open the doors for our challenges. So right now it's a close because we don't have a challenge. So fourth week of February, but we're going to open it a week before to let people in free, right?
Hmm.
And then I teach like the stuff like how do you do that? Like in our next challenge is it's going to weave around the game of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But it's basically moving people through like, what are you doing and how you're looking at the foundation part of your money. And then how do you get to wealth and what are the problems and what is the solution? You know,
Hmm.
but and I do a real estate one in third quarter, specifically in real estate, how to get to six figures with one property, 6-figure payday. So how do you go through that, right? So we do these free challenges, but you got to come into our group, and our Facebook group is Who Believes, and it's we're going to change the domain name, but you'll find it in my profile if you just follow me on Facebook. And we're in a couple of other platforms, but we haven't really leaned into that yet. My heart right now is for our members and for the people that the Lord points over our direction. But yeah, so just get on my donaldjd.com to just kind of see the pieces there, and then follow me on Facebook.
All right, perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you for blessing us with all your wisdom and your financial savvy. At least gets you thinking in the right direction if you're looking to, build your finances and build wealth in several different areas. So, just wanted to say thank you for blessing us with your time and jumping on the podcast. And thank you.